Ever since Iran and Israel traded direct attacks in each other's territory for the first time, heightened geopolitical tensions have been felt in South Korea's economy. Joining me to discuss is our economics correspondent Moon Hye-ryeon. Welcome back, Hye-ryeon.
Thank you for having me.
So Hye-ryeon, let's begin by talking about oil prices. What's been happening to international oil prices because of the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, Dami, oil prices have seen fluctuations over the past 2 weeks. Last week, oil prices shot up. The global benchmark Brent crude oil jumped by more than 3% and surpassed $90 per barrel as Iran and Israel traded direct attacks against each other's territory for the first time. Oil prices have also been fluctuating this week following Israel's limited retaliatory strikes, but did come down with traders dismissing the possibility of a sustained war between the two sides and the likelihood of the Strait of Hormuz being cut off. Washington might also place sanctions on Iranian crude oil, but the oil market's response has been limited so far.
Then how are these oil prices relevant in South Korea's current economic climate? I mean, what has the government been doing to try and tackle these hikes?
Well, Dami, you see, the main concern regarding oil prices is how it could be affecting consumer prices and whether it could become an obstacle to bringing the country's headline inflation down to the 2% range by the end of this year. The Federation of Korean Industries gave 4 different scenarios for how oil prices could affect consumer prices based on past case studies such as the 1973 oil crisis. Should active conflict break out and crude oil prices rise to over $100 per barrel, consumer prices could rocket up past 4%. And experts say that a fuel tax cut won't bring headline inflation down. Here's what one expert said, given that the core inflation rate, excluding food and energy prices, has been stable at around 2.5% this year.
This figure is the lowest level since 2022, implying that the price level, excluding the energy products, has stabilized a lot during the last 2 years. So, given that the price level has become already stabilized a lot compared to before, we can expect that the effect of the tax cut will be somewhat limited.
Then, other than oil prices, what other changes has the South Korean economy seen following these attacks?
So the South Korean won has been sharply depreciating against the US dollar over the past 2 weeks, with the US dollar strong in markets around the world. Recent data has shown that the exchange rate between the two currencies has risen by over 7% this year, and this rate exceeds that of the rate seen during the financial crisis of 2008. So last week, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok met with his counterparts from the US and Japan in Washington, D.C. and addressed concerns over the sharp devaluation of currencies against the dollar. Here's what he said.
Our 3 countries need to cooperate to actively respond to the financial instability that real economic uncertainty can cause.
The governor of the Bank of Korea also commented on the unstable currency exchange market during a press conference, saying that the volatility with the $1 exchange rate has been somewhat excessive and it should be minimal going forward as long as the situation in the Middle East does not get any worse. And he wasn't wrong. Looking at the $1 exchange rate this week, it's been less unstable than immediately following the attacks last week.
Now, if investors are seeking safe haven assets, wouldn't that also affect the country's stock market, especially the country's benchmark Kospi?
You're right, Dami. So the benchmark Kospi index has also seen a sharp decline. Last Friday, it dipped below the 2,560 mark for the first time since February. And this comes as foreign investors seek safe haven assets. But pundits say another big factor for stock investors has been hawkish remarks from Federal Reserve officials that shot down hopes of rate cuts earlier this year. Here's what an expert said.
For high-tech industries, the interest rate is very important for their investment plans. So with longer period of high interest rates, that they may scale back on their investment plans, and that's showing up in the stock prices of high-tech industries.
Well, there's certainly been a number of developments, but what can we expect going forward now? I mean, what contingency plans does the government have in place?
Well, the Finance Ministry has actually been hosting a number of ministerial economic meetings in order to discuss how to proceed during this time of economic uncertainties. Supply chains as a whole could be affected by conflict in the region, with such a scenario discussed during a ministerial economic meeting on Thursday. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok described the supply chain as fragile as thin ice and highlighted the importance of a strong supply chain that many of the country's high-tech sectors are reliant on. This comes ahead of the Act on Supply Chain Stabilization Support that will come into effect in June, and the government hopes that this will ensure stable management of future supply chain risks.
Certainly, let's keep a close eye on how the situation in the Middle East unfolds. Thank you so much for the report today, Hye-ryeon.
My pleasure.